once you get half an hour,
Yeah.
say half an hour, it takes 40 minutes.
No, very, very smart. We're good to go.
Welcome back, everybody. We're recommencing this council meeting. We're up to item 10.4, amendments to the council delegations to staff, and we have Sarah Watty to present this report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora koutou, everyone. So this report regards council's delegations to staff under the Resource Management Act. So there's a couple of key things covered off in the report, and we're seeking recommendations for those issues. The first is position-based changes to the current RMA delegations, which relate to positions in the infrastructure and strategy growth and recovery team. So they're set out on the second to last page of the report. Fairly straightforward. The second issue that this report addresses relates to the current delegation to staff under Clause 25, Schedule 1 of the RMA, which relates to private applications for plan changes, so to the district plan and other plans under the RMA. So you'll recall, those of you that were present will recall that this was discussed at council a couple of months ago, and there were some different options discussed in terms of how council might like to deal with this issue, and you asked staff to come back with some more specific options as regards recommendations and address some of the things that were discussed at the meeting. So this is the intent of bringing it back to you today. So you'll, having read the report, you'll note that staff are recommending that a change is made. So the recommended option is that council resolve to amend the delegations to staff under this particular clause to restrict the delegation of the power to the CE and deputy CE, hereby revoking the current delegations to other staff who hold this delegation, and requiring staff to advise council of when new applications are received and decisions made under the section. There are, of course, other options and other recommendations that are set out in the report. So one might be that council decide to revoke all staff delegations, and the practical effect of that would be that a report would need to be made to council. So staff would advise council on a recommended approach, and council would retain this delegation, noting that it's a quasi-judicial decision that is being made. There's a time frame, so it's 30 working days. So there might be some operational things that we would need to work around if council resolved to actually hold this delegation and exercise this power themselves. It might not fit, for example, within the existing calendar of council and strategy ops meetings. So that would mean convening an extraordinary meeting to make a decision if it was required. We might need to I guess, adopt a bit of a flexible approach as far as our ordinary report timeframes are concerned, in terms of all of the different things that need to be considered within quite a tight timeframe. So I just draw that to your attention, noting that other councils do hold this power themselves, and we have endeavoured to make contact with a couple that we know do, but haven't managed to reach them yet. So we would, if the decision was made to that council want to take this particular power back, then we could have some further discussions to look at what how this is exercised elsewhere and how we might work that in terms of the operational considerations. So you'll all have the section set out in Appendix 2, so you can get a feel for the type of decisions that are required. It's RMA, it's the RMA space, so there is an option to accept a request, to adopt a request, or to reject a request. In terms of oversight, potentially wanting more oversight, I think, all of the decisions, there's a bit of room for subjective decision-making and interpretation, and there's probably the most discretion and the least oversight as far as who makes the decision and the decision to reject the request. So basis for that could be that it's frivolous or vexatious, or that in fact council has adopted a a plan within the last 2 years, just to set out a couple of the examples. So look, from a staff perspective, having discussed this with Jason and with Ange, I think either could work. We would just need to look at our current schedule and potentially work around that as far as reports and advice up to council were concerned if you were wanting to retain this delegation. So look, I think that's the sum of it. I will note that if you adopt the recommendation BA, there would just need to be a slight tweak to wording to reflect the fact that under the RMA, delegations need to be are required to be direct from council to staff in any case. So there is no ability for the chief executive to sub-delegate a delegated power in any case. So the condition that I've set out there is redundant. So it would just be getting rid of the redundant wording. So happy. Oh yes.
Sorry, can I?
Yes.
Just the other thing that adds a little bit more complication to that decision is the election time frame. So we'd also have to go away and have a look at how we would work within that if the delegation is reverted back to council because of that 30-day window. And if we get really just the logistics around how that might work would be part of that too.
Yeah, I agree with that. So there's obviously, if a private request for a plan change was received in the lead up to the election, there's obviously the constraints around the election and other commitments relating to campaigning for candidates who will be standing again. So there's just a workload, I guess, thing to think about in terms of timeframes. And then after the election, there'll be a heavy focus for the new council on induction and training, and so most significant decisions that will be happening in the new calendar year. This is a decision that will need to be made, so we'd need to find a way for the new council to make it as in the new training.
I'll call for questions in a minute. I might just go first. So, is there a risk that there would be delays for applicants during, if not this election period, then subsequent ones?
Delays in decision making by council or staff?
If this was delegated to the council and there was a decision that needed to be made during the election period, presumably that might cause delays to applicants?
So in the pre-election period, a decision could still be made. So it would be, I think it's fair to say that this would be considered ordinary business. And then once the new election, once the new council is appointed, they would be able to they would need to make the decision, notwithstanding that a number of the candidates will be new and will need to get up to speed with, I guess, some of the substantive requirements of the RMA and the planning rules. And so it might be quite a difficult decision for some. So I think that there is a risk, but it would be an existing risk anyway because of the tight timeframes. So 30 working days is not a lot as far as the schedule of council or strategy and ops, which would be the logical committees that would consider this decision, are concerned. So just thinking about it operationally, if staff would receive a request, they would need to consider it, provide some advice in the way of a report that would inform a decision to council, and then that would be received as per other reports, and then council would need to consider it. So if the timeframes, that would be really tight timing to turn that around. So it might be that there wasn't a logical meeting scheduled for that to be considered at that met that 30 working day timeframe, and so we would need to look at well how do council meet? Is it an extraordinary meeting or what is the mechanism? But it's a statutory requirement, so there is a risk, and if it wasn't met, then we're not meeting that statutory requirement, which presents risk of appeal and a legal risk.
So my next question is, if with other councils who've retained this delegation, are there ever any problems with conflicts of interest or political pressure on councillors?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can only imagine that it does arise. I think it's logical that it would arise in respect of different interests in a local community. So I think that we would just need to be, if this council decided to retain the delegation and revoke the current delegation to staff, it would be something to be mindful of in any applications, private applications for plan changes that are received.
Thank you. Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, presumably staff already prepare a lot of that information under existing delegations to advise who the authority for that decision is delegated to. So it presumably wouldn't be too much more work to turn that into a council report, because you've got to prepare all that information because some of these decisions could be legally challenged as it is under existing delegation. So you've got to have the evidence base as to why you've made the decision you have. So how much more work would it be for that to actually be a council report on top of what's actually already prepared for the decision maker who it's delegated to?
So I understand we haven't had one of these applications for a number of years, and so I can't speak for staff that have been involved in making these decisions before. But Jason, did you have anything that you'd like to add to that? I won't presume to speak on behalf of your team.
I think in response to your question, Councillor, the answer is fundamentally the workload is the same. The same degree of rigour would need to go into the analysis that was presented if it was, say, the Chief Executive, for example, making the decision. They would receive a report which touched all the necessary bases in the same way that councillors would receive a report that touched all the necessary bases. So I don't think it's so much about that there would be extra work, so I don't think that's right. It's more just there's a different process that we need to follow. Obviously, councillors will be aware that we have a rigorous peer review process for reports that go to yourselves, and it needs to go on the public agenda so many days before you consider it. So all of that just shrinks the time frame. So I think I'd characterise it more as it's fundamentally the same work. It's probably just needs to be done in a shorter time frame because the process needs.
Cool. Thank you. That's very helpful. I guess my second question is, in terms of the frequency of strategy and ops and full council and this triennium, we've effectively had one of each of those every month bar summer holidays. So does that tend to suggest there is at least the frequency enough of meetings? And in fact, we've had to cancel, I think, a handful of strategy and ops meetings because there wasn't enough on the agenda. So, I mean, I don't imagine we're picturing a huge deluge of private plan changes given the costs involved, but does it sort of suggest there is the capacity in the meetings to handle them?
That may well be the case, but as Jason has just outlined, in terms of the transparency requirements under the Lagoima and, needing to get the agenda out a certain number of days in advance, there are just a few things that will slightly tighten that 30-day working time frame, which could be tricky. And so in terms of if we receive an application, it might be fine. We might be able to get it as soon as we receive it. I guess practically staff would get it booked in on the agenda. And then work really hard to make sure that they have done the analysis and are able to put a report up to council with a recommendation, which I guess just places a little bit more pressure on the staff involved there and slightly narrowing that time frame.
Cool. I guess my final question is it possible to have, I guess, some sort of almost hybrid solution where, for the most part, it's delegated to the CE or deputy CE, but if it's the CE considers it's, I guess, a plan change that would be significant to the district or covered a certain land area or something, that could be escalated up to the full council? Or, I guess, what options would there be, say, if councillors were like, actually, we want to be the ones who decide on a private plan change, and you've sent out the email to us saying, we've received this, we haven't decided on it. Would there be a mechanism for council, given that we might not have a council meeting, till 3 weeks, say, after something had been received? What sort of mechanisms would there be to say, hey, actually, we'd like council to make this decision, or the CE to say, actually, it's more appropriate for council to make a decision on a bigger thing?
Yeah. So look, that is possible under the current delegations, or if a change was made so that the CE or deputy CE holds the delegation, it would be possible for them to make a strategic decision, I guess, that this is actually something that council would be interested in and perhaps should consider and could consult with the chair about that. Sean, did you want to add anything to that?
I'm looking towards Jason. I'm not sure. I mean, that may create more issues with that decision-making process in terms of review or challenge if it's reliant on the chief executive to decide whether or not it goes to council. It's probably easier.
Why you made that call.
Yeah, and probably less time consuming if the delegation was changed to council. Then we know we need to work within the time frame to get it back to council. That would be my recommendation in terms of that. I don't know whether Jason or Tim has anything further to add on that, but I think we'd add another decision-making process into the equation, and also then something else that's possibly subject to challenge as well. So
I was just going to add briefly that I don't know that you're ever going to receive a straightforward, simple, flavoured plan change request. If it was straightforward and simple, then they'd be able to apply for a resource consent because it fit with the district plan as it is. So, yeah, I think there isn't a way to kind of categorise it so that, for example, the chief executive could get the easy ones and the tricky ones come to councillors, because I think you're going to end up, you might as well just say they're all going to come to councillors if that was what you were after.
Cool. Thank you.
Very elegant answer. Councillor Coots,
So true,
and then
though.
I'm going to Councillor Pavanov online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I had similar questions to Gwen, and I won't repeat them, but maybe just touch on a couple of points. So, given that we know that there are councils that are capable of doing this, are we in a position to make a decision today without having that information from them? Because, as Councillor Compton has said, committees meet quite frequently, and I hear the responses that you've given to him around timeframes. My question, one of them was around meeting those, why couldn't they come to those meeting timeframes? And also, especially in light of the fact that we don't get many every year.
So, I mean, our understanding of the councils, and we haven't been able to liaise to get really detailed information, as I said, on kind of the mechanics of how that works at a governance level, but our understanding is that those councils that do it, probably the things that might be better for them if staff, or if the CE was to hold the delegation, might be just around operational efficiency. Every council will have a slightly different schedule and governance set up. So I'm not sure, this is a personal view, but I'm not sure that it makes that much difference. I think we probably have the information we need to make a decision, and then it's just about, once a decision is made and there's a preference, it's about working out, well, how do we make that work within our particular governance model.
I think one of the questions that I'd heard, whether it was offline or around the table, was when elected members would receive that notification. And the way that I read the report would be that elected members would be notified when the application is received. So is that clear?
Yes, so that's what is proposed, and we could notify by email or by elected member bulletin, depending on the timing of that, and then it could be that decisions that are made, and no, there aren't that many, of course, that are, so it could be using the elected member bulletin for to notify decisions, or in fact, a council meeting. It could be a part of the CE update, for example.
Yeah, sure. The last one is around resource consent applications and hearings. Look, I'm not an accredited hearings commissioner, or nor had training, but my understanding is to consider those applications requires training, and it's not easy training. From what I can gather from those that have said it, it's required some effort to become a hearings commissioner. So what is so the paper referred to on page 209, no, sorry, I had it highlighted. Anyway, these are around risks. So that was on page 210. That's probably my primary concern, is that you have, and look, let's be frank, the elephant in the room could be the airport private plan change. One that would be quite political, and two would require a level of I would think skill that one would receive through RMA training and so forth to consider an application of that sort of type or scale. Could be other applications. I know the Meadows precinct, which we've been involved in, has previously put one through as a separate example to the airport. Could staff maybe speak more to the concerns around the capability around the table without the training of it. I've not had it, so I don't know.
I mean, I think there's the point that, I mean, you would, for this type of decision, there would be a report, there would be some advice from staff who are experienced in this area as to whether to adopt or accept or reject the request. So you would be relying on that and making the decision. So there would be, I think there would be a level of, it's fair to say there'd be a level of support around the decision, and it's, I mean, there's a little bit in the, you'll have, if, for those of you that have looked at the particular section that is in Appendix 2, there's a little bit to it, you know, it's kind of back and forward through the RMA, but if you think about, so for decisions to adopt or accept, there's a public notification process, right? So you just kick the ball off to say, yes, this fits, and then you go through that public notification process. For decisions to reject, an application, that's where there's, I guess, it's not subject to that notification requirement, and so that's kind of the end of the road unless there's an appeal to the Environment Court. So, but again, you would be relying on staff advice. Jason, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that in terms of capability, I guess, to make this particular type of decision under the RMA?
I think you've touched on it well, Sarah. There's a difference, and it's a subtle difference, and it's peculiar to private plan change requests between the decision that you would be as councillors asked to make, that's the Clause 25 decision, versus the decision, or should I put it more accurately, the report and recommendations that a hearings panel would be making to you after having considered the provisions and submissions on them. Quite different things. The requirement to have making good decisions accreditation is a requirement that applies to members of the hearings panel that, again, consider the provisions and the submissions raised or made on the provisions. And that's because of the fact that they've got to do things like consider all the higher order documents and how they apply. Requires a high degree of knowledge. Whereas the Clause 25 decision, it's just different. You're not being asked to make a decision about whether it's the most appropriate thing to do, having taken into account all the higher order documents. It is, I won't use the word simply because that's wrong, but it's a decision to, as Sarah's pointed out, accept, adopt, or convert to a resource consent application, or reject, and there are limited grounds on which you can reject. That is why there's that difference. So it's a funny process with that two steps. And that first Clause 25 one, you don't need to then make another decision about whether you're notified or not. That just happens. So the conversation that we had earlier about plan change, the 4 plan changes, that's not actually something you need to do in a private plan change request. So it's quite a different process.
Councillor Pravanov.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and Jason and Sarah. So just a couple of questions. So there's been quite a lot of discussion about the 30-day working time frame here, and so that is actually when the clock is ticking. I'm also aware that there haven't been any private plan change for a real long time, but previously I have been involved in them, and from memory is that they take much longer than I suppose that calendar month that is people maybe are thinking about here. It might be 30 working days, but in reality there's lots and lots of time when the clock is actually stopped. And I think it might have been one of either Jason or actually might have been Jason mentioned that potentially there's hearings as well. So these private plan change, you know, may well be protracted events, and so what that does is provides more, I suppose, more of a heads up when these things are submitted or when they've been formally received, rather than, you've got to make sure that they're okay first. But then again, there is some potential, maybe it's a bit more tricky figuring out when a decision is ready to be made. So I'm just interested to hear some comments on that, about how really potentially it's much more than a month further down the track, than when a decision potentially would be made, would come to councillors if it all, once it had gone through the processes that it needed to.
Thanks, Councillor Pravanov. I think what you might be referring to is the process that plays out after the decision is made to adopt or accept the request, or treat it as a resource consent, go through the resource consent process. So the public notification, the timeframe around that is 4 months. So that is a lot longer. But the 30 working day timeframe is the timeframe for that initial decision.
Right. Okay. I missed that completely. Okay. So really that is, so what happens if the application comes in, it's deemed as not having all the information that's needed to go forward? Is it then delayed? Can it then be delayed?
Yeah, so a local authority can request further information under one of the first sub-clauses of this particular clause. So that would, and then once that's received, the 30 working day timeframe applies. So there's a few different things that play out.
Yeah, so that's actually what I'm referring to. So that, and I suppose even once it's been received, as deemed all the information is present, the clock potentially can be stopped in that time frame as well, or not?
No, there would need to be a basis to stop the clock. So you'd need to work within the provision to, so if you received an application that didn't have the information that was required, I think you'd go down the route. And here it's, you can see 25(1)(b). A local authority shall, within 30 working days of receiving all required information or any report which was commissioned under clause 23. And then if you go to clause 23, that talks about the ability to request further information. So there'd be but there's not a generic ability to stop the clock.
Oh yes, no, I understand that. It's got to be something that's written into the RMA. Yeah. So I'm just looking here. Is there any time frame that, if additional information is requested, is there a time frame in which they have to provide that, or is it open? It's up to the applicant to provide it when they see fit.
So I haven't brought that particular section in. So I think in terms of other ins and outs, we could look into that. But I think this is a decision. This is the decision that needs to be made within 30 working days, right? So you would need to decide that within any of these parameters that are set out here in this clause, you would need to decide whether you adopt, accept, decline, and then you work through the process. So it isn't, the time frame is the time frame, and we can look into the things that sit around that, because obviously the RMA is is complex, but I think what you're getting to is there a 30-day working time frame? And this decision does require that. So
I understand the 30-day. I'm a hearing commissioner, so I understand the 30 working day time frame. But the clock can be stopped for valid reasons. In some reality, potentially it can be longer.
Thank you, Councillor Pravanov. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. 2 quick questions. First one is, would it be fair to say that we wouldn't get many private plan changes in a year? I mean, not taking the work, from now on, so to speak.
Yes. So my understanding is that the staff in the room, in the strategy growth and recovery team, haven't themselves received one. So yes, that's correct.
I think that's been true because you haven't been able to process one because of the district plan change being being a proposed district plan change, is that right? Now that we have landed it, I mean, I'm picking that these things don't come through on a regular basis at all, that they're fairly rare.
I don't think anybody can say for sure how many we could receive. It would be impossible to judge. There may be some pent-up interest, given how long it took the proposed district plan to become operative. And it will be interesting to see post the intensification plan change being notified. And look, some developers may have been hoping for it to include some certain things and either find they are happy or not, and that might be a factor in how many we receive. I think you've been through consultation on a growth strategy and you're aware of some of the things that developers are interested in doing. So that probably gives you a sense as well of some likely possibilities, but until somebody actually lodges the written request, it's all just speculation.
My other question is, could this be a delegated authority to a subcommittee as such that was made up of maybe some senior officers and maybe two councillors, or the mayor and a councillor, or deputy mayor and a councillor, or a combination of as such?
It could be.
Councillor Elliott.
Look, thanks. So I've gone through those previous plan changes and found them quite significant events for the public. Lots and lots of public interest in them. So they're not a sort of a minor thing at all. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that they had to be a decision made by council in a council meeting, not at an SNO meeting or the other forms of those meetings that we've had. And they were or were not in public excluded. Perhaps Janet would remember. I suspect that they were in public excluded as well.
Are you referring to the previous report, the district plan changes, or are you referring to the current report?
The current report.
The current
private plan changes. Yeah, we did a couple.
Could you repeat the question?
I thought they had to be in a council meeting, so they couldn't be in an S&O meeting, and I thought that they had to be in public excluded as well.
I'll actually refer to staff to answer that.
The ability to exercise this particular power needed to be council.
Yeah.
That's not my understanding. Jason, did you want to add anything there?
So maybe just bigger picture to start with. The Resource Management Act allows for all decisions in terms of plan making to be delegated, except for the final decision in the process, which is essentially to make the plan or plan change operative. So that gives councils the ability to delegate each and every decision along the path if it so chooses. And my understanding is, and it's, I can't talk back in terms of history for how long it's been this way, but my understanding, and certainly that's what's the foundation of this report before you, is that delegation is currently, in terms of a Clause 25 decision, with a range of staff, chief executive and below.
Okay. And there are people around the table who, elected members like Jocelyn, myself, Janet, others who have got full RMA training, but it's also possible for newly elected members, even if they're currently independent commissioners, RMA commissioners, to be elected to council. Isn't that right? So there's not going to be a total vacuum of the decision-making knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would that be correct?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Look, I would just have to say that knowing the way how significant these decisions are, I would just have to suggest that any change from them being made by council elected members would not be taken too lightly in the community.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure that that's what's being suggested at the moment. Correct me if I'm wrong. Actually, I'll let Sarah explain what part of the process this decision is, which is a decision whether to accept the application, and then where that final decision sits with council.
Yeah, I'm quite comfortable for it to be as it has been, no changes.
As it has been as a delegation to staff.
Oh, okay.
So just to add to that, Madam Chair, so if staff were to hold the delegation, then I guess there would be a level of public notification for decisions to adopt or accept or treat it as a resource management application, so resource consent application. In regards to a decision to reject, there is no requirement to notify. So I think that's where, potentially from a perception or community perception, if this is perceived as quite a significant decision, that, if staff were doing it, then it wouldn't, potentially that's an issue. It's probably more perception than reality. I did just want to clarify just a point that I made earlier, just in response to Councillor Halliday's question about whether we could sub-delegate this power to a committee. I think you might have. I didn't hear you say staff, but just to be clear that if council are operating as a committee, then staff can't be appointed to that committee. So it would just be a committee of councillors rather than any staff.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. I think it's Councillor McCann next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With your permission, it's an observation.
Sure.
One of the reasons that I remember bringing this issue up, and others have as well, because there was a concern that council may have made itself somewhat impartial regarding some potential development, because some statements had been made. Mm-hmm. That situation has now resolved itself, and therefore it's quite possible that the thing that we were trying to ensure that we did, which was remain impartial, is no longer on the table.
Okay. Look, we've got various recommendations in front of us. What I think I'll do is I'll get through A, and so if I could have a mover and seconder for the amendments, the council delegations. No, that's C. Oh no.
Just so there are two key recommendations. So A is in relation to the position-based changes and the infrastructure.
That's what I'm looking for. A mover and a seconder for the position-based changes, please. Just A at the moment. Councillor Coots has moved. Can I have a seconder? Position-based changes, A, and the infrastructure team. Any takers? I'll second it. So moved by Councillor Coots, seconded by the Mayor. Any debate around that one? I'll put that to the vote. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. My apologies if I missed a potential seconder on that one. So we've got various options here for B. Does anybody want to move one of those options?
I'll move option B.
BA. Okay, so we've got option B. We've got recommendation B, option A, moved by Councillor Compton, seconded by Councillor Coots. Any debate? We've had a good go with questions. I think everybody's okay with that. To clarify, that's the option which imposes conditions on delegations to staff, restricting the delegation to the Chief Executive and Deputy Chief Executive, but requiring them to advise Council of any such applications. Councillor Randall, and then Councillor Halliday.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I've had my hand raised a number of times just now to move or second these two resolutions, and I even did the thumbs up. But obviously that's not been communicated to you. So
My apologies, Councillor Randall. What I have in front of me is a little screen, and I didn't see your hand up there. That will be my mistake.
I put the thumbs up as well.
I can't see thumbs up or hands up very well from here. I rely on the little screen by my microphone.
Madam Chair, sorry for interrupting you, but all I can see on the screen is the recommendations. I can't see anything else other than the list of recommendations. So I've got no way of communicating with you other than maybe a point of order.
Yeah, these hybrid meetings are certainly a challenge at Councillor Randall, and my apologies that I missed the notification here on my little screen that you had your hand up. Unfortunately, we've got a mover and a seconder now, but if you'd like to contribute to the debate, here's your opportunity.
No, I mean, I support it. It's moved by Gwen Compton, so obviously it's going to be good, so I will support it.
Yeah, and my apologies that I missed your hand up there, Councillor Randall. I shall attempt to keep my eye better on the screen. It's not a perfect system. So I'll put that to the vote. Oh, hang on, Councillor Halliday.
I was wondering if it's a very, very small amendment. It's on B number 2, where it says through elected members' bulletin or other communication such as email. Maybe changed to and the communication such as email. Or just goes it would get it via email rather than just the EMB.
Any issues with that?
The intention of having or was so that it could be, either or depending on when the EMB is going out. So just to make sure that you were in fact notified, but not to overload you with both mechanisms. So it's over to you what you prefer, but I would probably recommend retaining or flexibility, which could be both. But
okay, that's fine. No, I just popped it in there. I'm happy with that.
I think you're indicating that you'd quite like to be informed by email. Okay, so I'll now put that motion. Oh, have we got another hand up? So we do. Councillor Pravanov. We're now in debate.
I've had my hand up for a while, I have to say.
It wasn't on my screen.
Pardon?
Sorry, how long have you had your hand up for?
For a while.
Okay, it wasn't on my screen. My apologies for that.
Okay. So I suppose there's a difference, quite a big difference between having been notified of these plan changes, which we currently are due in the elected members' bulletin, and they are on the KCDC website. So really that it's not changing at all. If they're included as email, which is better, but I suppose the issue too is what information are we going to be provided? So currently we're provided with about 5 words as I suppose we're provided with the name of the applicant, maybe the address, and about 5 words explaining what, which I suppose that's a resource consent. And the question is, how much information would we be provided around the plan changes?
So we're in debate now. Staff are in the room, and I think they've noted your suggestions around that information, and maybe we can sort out more details about what elected members are provided with as we move through the process of working out how this is going to roll.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's a case of where in terms of debating, I actually agree that it is potentially a slight improvement, but reality is it's a long way from being involved in the decision-making process, which Big B, little b actually suggests. And so I won't be voting for Big B, little a, because I don't believe that that we have enough oversight into what potentially could be occurring in these plan changes.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Pravanov. Okay, I'm going to put the motion now. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye.
What motion are we talking about?
So the motion moved by Councillor Compton, seconded by Councillor Coots, and it's recommendation B, option A, delegation to the Chief Executive or Deputy Chief Executive, with councillors being informed.
Thank you.
So, did I say? I didn't get to against. Against? Okay, does anybody want a division? Okay, Councillor Bravanov is called for a division. All those who voted aye, I think I called for aye, put your hand up.
Councillor Hanford, Councillor Compton, Councillor Coots, Councillor Holborough, Councillor McCann and Councillor Buswell. And Councillor Randall online, I think. Is there anyone else online?
Abstention and no from Councillor Bravanov.
An abstention from Councillor.
Sorry, division for Councillor Bravanov. And against from Councillor Elliott. And 4 from Councillor Randall.
So those against, Councillor Elliott, and I'm still not sure what Councillor Bravanov. Is that an against? Against, and Councillor Halliday against.
Have we got that clear, staff? Moving right along. Thank you very much, Sarah. So next we have 10.5, which is Social Investment Fund, Expressions of Interest. Okay, so Councillor Halliday and Councillor Hanford are moving back from the table.
Wow. And that's Councillor Randall's raised even moved from the table. I just didn't quite chat. Speaking of moving back. Councillor Randall's just raised his hand.
Thank you. Just before we begin, I've got a hand up on Zoom. Councillor Randall?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I'll be voting against this resolution, but I'm not going to give the reasons why, because the decision was made by an independent committee. So I don't feel...
Councillor Randall, I believe it's most appropriate to make those points during debate. We haven't introduced the paper yet, so I'll just go through the process. We'll have the paper, then we'll have questions, and then I'll invite you to make your comments at that time, if that's okay. So we have Janice McDougall and Claire here to...
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, good afternoon, everybody. Today we bring before you a paper seeking your approval of which expressions of interest for the 2022-2024 Social Investment Fund will be carried through to the next stage of the process, which is the development of proposals. As is outlined in the report, all of the expressions of interest have been considered by an independent panel selected by a working party made up of some councillors and myself. That panel makes recommendations to you today via this report for your consideration. I think that it's important to note that this is the second 3-year round of social investment funding. 8 organisations received contracts to deliver programs that provided that were anticipated to provide or create outcomes that were in keeping with the purpose of the social investment program and the change that it seeks to make within the communities that we have here in Kapiti. So for the decision that you're considering today, you are deciding which very brief expressions of interest will go through to the next stage to develop full proposals, to then be once again considered by the independent panel who will make recommendations to you about which of those proposals should be agreed to by this council and therefore become subject to a contract for service between the council and the organisation behind them to deliver those programs or services across the next 3 years. Claire Iwi, our Senior Program Advisor in the Connected Communities team, is here with me today, and we are happy to answer any questions that you have on this report.
Many thanks for that. Do I have any questions of staff? I know we've already had a good chance to have a discussion with staff around these. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. Janice, can you tell me when this policy was set up? And I think it was just 2 years ago. And when is it being renewed?
The social investment program was developed over several years, 5 or 6 years ago nearly, that work started. 2017 was when it started. And the direction that was set in terms of the purpose and the principles of that program and the outcomes that it sought for the first 3 years have largely been carried through into the program for the second round of social investment.
And when is this policy going to need renewal?
This program of activity will be reviewed ahead of the next round of social investment, so the next 3-year program. I expect that review will consider both the effectiveness of the social investment program as it stands, and then would also review whether or not the principles and criteria that guide, I guess, the focus areas for the fund, are they still the right areas, what would be nearly 6 years down the track at that point from when the first program started?
Yeah, and also, I guess, a chance to review the process and maybe looking at more efficient ways to do this, going forward. So anyone who has any suggestions to make about that could make them at the time, eh?
Indeed, they could.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Councillor Randall.
Yeah, I've already indicated that I'll be voting against it, but following on from Councillor Elliott, I would think that all these grants that we give should come under one umbrella, like the Grants Allocation Subcommittee. The Grants Allocation Subcommittee gives grants to a large number of organisations under different categories, but this is outside it, and this can create confusion. So in the future, perhaps staff can look at putting all grants, all money allocated by council to a common body like the Grants Allocation Subcommittee.
Yeah, Ms McDougall would like to make a comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor. I think a very important distinction to make at this stage is that what is before you for consideration today is not a paper asking you to make grants. These are not grants. And I appreciate that with the current financial year's funding for social investment having been turned into a social impact grants fund for one financial year, this current one, we have potentially muddied the waters. But the social investment fund is very distinct from a grants program. It is about procuring services that help achieve social outcomes.
Okay, do I have any further questions? Councillor McCann? Councillor McCann is moving the recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Buswell. Open for debate. Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'd like to congratulate the team. This is really hard work that has been engaged upon and with our community. There is some really significant need out there, and councillors will remember that we've been incredibly flexible, changing things up to deal with COVID. So, well done to everyone for reacting to the needs of our community. It doesn't, the problem always is that there is always more demand than there is the money to be able to put into our communities. But I'd particularly like to thank Asher Wilson Goldman, it's a double-barreled name, will catch me, and the committee that spent, I imagine, many hours going through this, going through the applications to provide some good advice to councillors, which we're following through on today. I think the process has been extremely well run. We've had a very good range of different people from across the community providing that advice to councillors. So I'd just like to commend the staff on a really well run process, but that will not mean that everyone in our community is happy. There is just such significant need out there. And as other councillors have mentioned, we always need to review all of these processes in a rolling maul because the world is changing, and that's the thing that we've noticed in our triennium. Anything that we expected to happen, it's different now. So there is a lot of validity in making sure that we're keeping our eye on the ball to make sure that these processes are still fit for purpose. So well done to the team, and I would recommend that councillors do support this body of work and the recommendations in front of us. They have been well thought through by a very good committee.
Yes, and I believe if we mention one member of the committee, we should probably mention the others. I'm thinking it's because Asher came and presented to us and explained some of the decisions. We also had Tabitha McKenzie, Sarah Helm, Sue Immorale, and David Journey. So a fantastic committee. And while we might not agree with every single decision that they made, some of us, certainly they went through a really robust process, and there's still another process to go through. So huge thank you to staff and everybody who was involved. A massive amount of work going through these applications and a lot of work yet to do to develop these into full proposals and then consider those. So thank you, Claire Rewi, in particular. The work you do in this space is just extraordinary and massive. So thank you so much. Do I have any further debate? Right, a reply? Waived. So I'll put that to a vote now. All in favour, just to confirm what we're voting on. Where are we? Now. So we've got recommendations A, B, C, and D on page 219 of councillors' agendas. So all in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? We have Councillor Randall against. Do you want a division, Councillor Randall? No, he doesn't require a division. We'll note the abstentions. Thank you of Councillor Halliday and Councillor Hanford, who have sat back from the table through the process. Well back from the table, I might say. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Job well done. We're up to item 10.6, rates remissions for land protected for natural or cultural conservation purposes. In brackets, update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is the same...
Just hang on a minute, Andy. We've just got Mike Mendonca just approaching the table. We'll just settle. So have we got Andy Mackay online presenting this? Is that right, Mike? Yes. Welcome, Andy. You're free to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors. So this is essentially the same report as last month. There was one property that was left off the list, so we're just correcting the record this month to make sure that they're included in this year.
So apologies, if it feels familiar. We're here on 26th of May.
Hang on, use your microphone for the councillors online, please. Thank you.
I'm colourblind, I can't see.
Mike Mendonca is going to add a little bit. Yes.
So apologies, councillors. So if this feels familiar, it's because it is, because you consider this on the 26th of May. There are about 120 properties that get this rates permission. We introduced 5 new ones, but we left the name off the list. So apologies, but we have to go through this process to do it properly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Do I have any questions? Councillor Elliott.
Through you, Madam Chair, I've read the report and I'm happy to move this recommendation.
Thank you. And Councillor Buswell is seconding. Oh, sorry. Ask your question now.
I thought Councillor Elliott had a question. It's a very simple one.
No worries.
Is the through you, Madam Chair, is the name He Taki? Is it? If that's been missed out, is it? Just on the recommendations, just clarifying the name.
Andy, can you clarify the name? Heitaki?
Sorry, what was the name of?
Can you repeat the question, please, Councillor?
Oh, look, I'm just clarifying, Andy, through the recommendation that's here. The rates remission property set out in the. Is it Hitaki the name of the report?
I think I can.
Oh, sorry. That's a section in the report.
Right. Sorry. Okay. Rightio. So the actual property is not listed in this. In that.
Yeah, it is. It's so in Hitaki dash issues. It's 153 Pika Road.
Cool. All right. No, that's fine. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, Hitaki issues is the section of the report where the properties are identified.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Buswell. Councillor Elliott, would you like to say anything?
No, it's fine.
Any other debate? I'll put that to the vote. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
We move on to confirmation of minutes on page 248. Okay, so we're moving the minutes of 7th of June 2022. Do I have somebody to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Compton, seconded by Councillor Hanford. Anybody got any comments or corrections? Anything they'd like to resile from, as one of our councillors used to say? Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. So we have no one for public speaking time at the end of the agenda. So we did have a matter of an urgent nature, and we were going to have to move into public excluded, but that matter apparently has already been dealt with, so we're no longer required to do that. So I will now draw this meeting to a close. Thank you very much, everybody. We do, though, still want to have a discussion amongst councillors. So, Tim